Okay.
Uh,
My,
well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I would expect that we will have more people jumping on. We get back-to-back meetings sometimes, and I know we schedule our community of practices from 1 to 2:30 just to give a little extra time for those topics when they need them. Sometimes they get done more at 2. I know it can be problematic for individuals sometimes to be able to stay that full hour and a half. Um,
Mhm.
so sometimes they drop off around 2 as well. But we do record and post and share out with folks. So if you have to jump off early, or if you're someone who had to join late and you're really interested in something you might have missed, it will be available in a recording. So um, good afternoon. I am Amy Dessenberg Wines, and I help support the Iowa Coalition for Integration and Employment. Welcome to our monthly community of practice. And I am just delighted to have Rebecca here from the Iowa Department for the Blind. We had, and I don't know if Beth is on. Oh, I see you, Beth. Beth, you brought up at one of our previous sessions something that you thought would be helpful is if we could dive a little bit deeper into kind of that full potential array of services from a VR perspective. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Beth, but feel free to interject and clarify as well. But this really did come from your comment that day of, wow, there's so much more that a student might be eligible for. Um, and how can we learn more about this that might go beyond pre-eds too? Or sometimes it might be even with pre-eds. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Beth, about that, because I don't know that Rebecca was there. I tried to communicate earlier what you said, but I'm not sure that I was exactly on target.
Yeah, I think that, some of us who work with students who are at like the middle school, high school level, we're preparing for that next step in the journey. And we prepare them for what we know about those initial stages of supports through voc rehab. But like, I'm not aware of some of those other supports that are going to be available down the road. And so it was really neat to hear about some of those from just like one of those conferences I went to over the summer, and thinking about, okay, if we know this is where the student is and this is where they need to get to, how can we get them there? Knowing what that reality could look like was really helpful and could really support our planning.
Thank you, Beth.
Hmm.
For folks who don't know this, each state is slightly different. Iowa has 2 VR agencies. Sometimes in some states, they're a combined agency. So in Iowa, we have the Iowa Department for the Blind, which is a VR agency that focuses on supporting individuals who are blind or have low vision, as well as other disabilities. And we also have Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services. So we have two VR agencies. And IVRS is a much bigger organization. So sometimes people don't know that IDB is also a standalone VR agency. Um, with Rebecca today, one I think real advantage for us is that Rebecca used to work for IVRS, and now works for the Iowa Department for the Blind, and both agencies are governed um, under certain rules under WIOA. So there is consistency in what the regulations say as far as VR services, that sort of thing. Mary Jackson did a presentation with Carrie. So Mary with Iowa Voc Rehab, Carrie Osterhaus with the Iowa Department for the Blind, and they are sharing a presentation they did, and Rebecca's bringing her experience in as well to try to give a broad overview of really kind of both, regardless of which agency is serving someone, what are things you could maybe expect. So Rebecca shared earlier that if people have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, to unmute if you want. As we're going along, I'll help watch the chat, but feel free to ask questions as you have them. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. I am very delighted to come and present this information to you guys. As Amy mentioned, that I did work for IVRS and now I work for Iowa Department for the Blind. A little bit about me is that I started at IVRS as a secretary. And I quickly realized that this was my passion, this was my jam. And I got a rehabilitation associate position where I started serving 12 different school districts in Marshall, Tama, Jasper, Poweshiek, Hardin counties. And through there, I really found I had a passion for transition and students who are on IEPs, 504 plans, nursing services. And so that's really where my journey began. I have now been a grad student at Drake University in the clinical rehabilitation counseling program. For the last 2 years, I'm on the downward slide and about to finish that. So that is going to be great. I'm very excited to just kind of help you guys walk through some of this process again. If you have a question on what's on the slide, just unmute and ask. This can definitely be open dialogue as we go through it. So, as also mentioned, Carrie and Mary did put this presentation together, so I'm going to do my best at following their lead. First, kind of what our learning objectives will be as I go through this presentation today. We're going to learn about Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services and Iowa Department for the Blind Services. We're going to hopefully understand how IVRS and IDB collaborate. We'll understand the vocational rehabilitation process for a student with a disability, and we'll learn the value of collaborating for service delivery for students with disabilities.
Rebecca, you have some gray boxes on the screen.
Oh,
I don't know if other folks are seeing those as well, but
gray boxes.
Yeah, it's showing on my screen too. It just down in the bottom right, it almost looks like there's a chat box or maybe the way your viewer mode is, it's maybe your second screen, but we can't see it. It's just like a gray box.
Oh, I don't know how to make it go away. Maybe this.
it covers some of the slide. Oh, that looks like it's better.
Oh, and then I stopped sharing. Let me try this again. Okay. How about now? Is it still there?
I don't see the gray box, but now I see your head. That's interesting.
Oh,
I've never
my.
seen that. Your head is sort of superimposed over.
It's
Well,
not in front of the words though.
Right.
not in front of the words, but you just have like a great big head.
It just looks like you're presenting it. It looks nice.
Yeah, it wasn't a huge head. It was a proportionate head.
We will do this one more time. Okay. How about now? Is that a little bit better?
The slide's a lot smaller. We can still see and read it. And now you're like on the left side, almost like a side by side, you and your screen.
Oh my goodness. It's been a while since I've
These are
presented.
really fancy settings. I'm curious how you're doing some of it.
To be honest, I don't know how I'm doing any of it. Like I would just like the slide without my face.
Very cool, actually. I think it's
Is it?
yeah.
Yeah.
I just did an update before I got on. It said Zoom Workplace was
Oh, so
updating. So maybe
maybe it's new features. Yeah.
maybe so. Okay.
Would you like me to share the presentation?
Let's try this one last time. I was clicking some buttons. Well, yeah, now it's not sharing at all.
No, it is sharing your screen, but now it's showing it in like preview mode. You're not in presentation mode for your slideshow.
There.
There you go. Perfect.
We got it. Okay.
You're still half your face, half the slides. So the slides are pretty small.
Not on my screen.
No?
On my screen, all I see is her presentation, the big one by itself.
Same here. All I see is the big presentation as well.
Perfect.
Nice.
I got side by side, but I can see it. It's readable.
It's readable. Well, good thing is the presentation is also in chat, because there are a lot of resource links embedded in the presentation as well. So I definitely encourage you, while you're working with individuals and students, that you're wanting to connect with VR or IDB, the links in here are going to be very useful for everybody. Okay, so vocational rehabilitation services, IVRS. These are career services that are geared towards youth and adults with disabilities to help them achieve their employment goals. Individuals work with a qualified vocational rehabilitation counselor to identify their strengths, interests, and employment needs. Very person-centered planning is what we do. You'll find a lot of this in the way of career counseling and guidance. So just providing a lot of that informed choice information on what an individual is looking for. Job training and education. So sending, helping support somebody in college or in continuing education classes. Job search assistance, job placement. Sometimes with job search assistance and job placement, we can utilize community rehabilitation partners, so CRPs, to provide some of those services depending on our capacity. Disability-related skills training, rehabilitation technology, pre-employment transition services, and more. It just really, a lot of the times depends on that individual and what it is that they are needing. As mentioned earlier, vocational rehabilitation services in Iowa are funded to two different agencies. Iowa Department for the Blind is its own agency, and we are governed by RSA, just like, whoops, something popped up and I lost my presentation. Here we go. Just like IVRS, we do 9/11 reporting, we get feedback from RSA. So this last year or so, we all received a lot of feedback from RSA after their monitoring visit. And we have begun to kind of tighten up and change some policy and do a lot of things for Iowa Department for the Blind. And I know that you've also seen that at IVRS. And a lot of those changes were handed down by our federally funding agency. And part of those big changes was related to WIOA, which I know many of you guys have heard and talked about many times, so I won't go too far into what WIOA is, but it is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and it was signed into law July 2014. Some of the key changes that are impacting students with disabilities would be these pre-employment transition services that both IVRS and IDB have been tasked with providing in public education systems. And it's also was to start limiting the use of sub-minimum wages. And I know we've seen a lot of those kind of workplaces that would give some sub-minimum wages disappear or go obsolete. We're all about community integrated employment. Something that WIOA has changed is that there's a lot more collaboration between schools, VR, counties, community rehabilitation partners and providers, and other providers like IWD. IVRS and IDB work with the schools to create a continuum of services. So while we're working with students who are still under public education, we are also trying to help them plan and be prepared for what comes after public education. Services provided by IVRS and VR will not supplant the legal responsibility of the schools. And we'll talk about school plans in a little bit here. And the goal of all this collaboration is just to help develop a system that will lead to competitive integrated employment for all students with disabilities. Who can access services? Potentially eligible and eligible VR clients is something that you may have heard of a lot. A potentially eligible student is a student with a documented disability and is in a current education program and is aged 14 through 21. Vocational rehabilitation counselors coordinate those needed pre-employment transition services. And this is not where a vocational counselor would be opening a file for a student. The student would be potentially eligible basically based off of the school's identification of the student needing additional supports to be able to kind of engage in some of those pre-employment transition services. The other area is that there are students who are eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. That just means they have completed an application, they have been determined eligible for services, and they have developed an individualized plan for employment with a vocational counselor. Potentially eligible students don't qualify for all VR services, just those pre-ET services. An eligible student for vocational rehabilitation services qualifies for all the services that they may potentially need, which could include transportation and different things like that. Other individuals that can access vocational rehabilitation services is, of course, adults with disabilities as well. What is pre-employment transition services, pre-ETS? Well, this is our 5 area. It's job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, counseling on opportunities, workplace readiness training, and self-advocacy instruction. So we have this nice little visual how all of these services go into each other. And these are some of the base services that we have recognized that students need assistance with, especially when they have been on maybe an individualized education plan and they haven't been able to participate in some of the programming that the school provides as some of their peers have. So job exploration counseling is just really, sitting down with that person-centered approach with the student and just finding out, what they've been doing at school, what their likes and dislikes are, like what their family is like. And so just doing a lot of that exploration on different positions that they might be interested in. Work-based learning, so getting students out into in the community to participate in some type of work experience. Counseling on opportunities looks a lot like going through kind of what higher education might look like for them if they're wanting to go into post-secondary education. Workplace readiness training, just, utilizing and training and learning some of those skills that you need in the workforce. And self-advocacy, a lot of that is talking about, maybe accommodations they might need or how to advocate for themselves in employment. All very important areas that students need. We have a little flow chart here. I'm going to see if this is going to work for me, if it pops out. That just kind of shows the difference between a potentially eligible student and an eligible student. Can you see PE student versus VR eligible student? Or is my slide still up?
We can see it.
We can see it.
So a potentially eligible student, the student, family, or school staff said that the student would be interested in participating. They would then be giving a pre-ETS agreement. It would have to be completed by the student, the parent, and the VR counselor. And then at that time, we would want some type of documentation showing that the student either has a diagnosed disability or is on an IEP or 5-year forward plan. So sometimes this takes collaboration and connection with the district that the student is in, access to the Achieve system to either view the student who's on the IEP and gain access to their information. And once that information is gathered and the student and guardian agree that the student would like to participate in pre-ETS activities, then they would begin participating in those at the school. And depending on the district and the school, those pre-ETS activities might look different. The difference with a potentially eligible student is by the time they reach 22, if they had not opened an actual file with IVRS or IDB, then their application would be closed at age 22. So it's only services for students who are 14 to 22. If pre-ETS are no longer needed, if family has decided they've learned enough, they're going to be successful in college, they're going to be successful in whatever their next step would be, then the pre-ETS it closes and they move forward. Now, if a student applies for individualized services with VR due to having a significant barrier to employment, then they go through their IVRS application process, which can take up to 60 days for eligibility determination. There could potentially be a waiting list. I'm not sure statewide if there is a waiting list with IVRS, but I do know in the Des Moines area, there is a waiting list at the moment. But even if a student is placed on a waiting list, they are still going to receive those pre-employment transition services as needed. Once a student is determined eligible for IVRS services, they then have 90 days to write a plan, which the plan is based off of their employment goal. So anything we are needing support service-wise to support the student into obtaining their employment goal, whatever that may be. So when a student in transition has an open file, this will carry into adulthood. So once they graduate from public education, if they're going into secondary education, if they're going into 4+, if they're just going into employment, then the IVRS or IDB file or plan for employment would follow until they are employed and have been employed and stable for at least 90 days. Okay. On to the next slide.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rebecca, I was trying to unmute really fast so I could ask you a question. This
Absolutely.
is Peter, and I was curious for the pre-ETSA agreement for IDB. Do you guys use the same form as IVRS, or is it a different form? Where can we find that?
As far as I know, for pre-ETS, they are using that same form, and I believe it would be on our website. I might need to write that down and get that to you, because I would assume the IVRS form has IVRS on it. So maybe we do have our own form. I will say I have not seen it yet, as my role with IDB is not with youth at the moment, but I am going to find that out.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
And if anything, that form is provided on our website, which there will be kind of links here that I'll share in the end. The other thing with pre-ETS and Iowa Department for the Blind is we actually do not hold that 14 to 22. We open files for students who are in middle school, elementary school. So it may not be, it's a little bit different than IVRS just because there's very specific needs sometimes when it comes to an individual who's experiencing blindness and needing access to our library for transcribing, school documents that the district might need to teach that individual. So most of the individuals who are coming to the Department for the Blind are probably going to have open files, and you're not going to see a lot of potentially eligible just because we're not holding people to that 14 years old. We will open files a lot earlier for individuals when it comes to IDB VR services. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome. Okay, collaboration. It's more important than ever. I know we hear that so much, but it's so true. Everybody needs to collaborate for students because it seems like there's just so many people involved coming together, and IDB and IVRS working together is something that we just found beneficial. So we actually have a memorandum of agreement, which is shared down here on the bottom. So in a school district, if a IVRS contracted program is their IDB students or individuals who are, also having blindness can engage with those services together. So we like to work together in outreach to the students with disabilities and kind of help, provide informed choice and informed information and try to engage school staff. It's important either if you're working with IVRS or IDB to be inviting those VR counselors to IEP meetings. It's a lot of information and a lot of things that are happening in the school district are going to give invaluable information to the VR counselors moving forward and trying to help navigate and find services once public education is finished. We try to include students with disabilities in all school activities, really working on a lot of that parent engagement and funding decisions for their students that are, maybe becoming of age and moving on into the adult work life. Something that we definitely collaborate a lot on are the local school plans. I don't know how many people are familiar with those, but those are just very important documents for LEAs. And I know I have a slide coming up on it, but the Department of Education, LEAs, IDB, IVRS, just that collaboration together in the beginning to talk about what each agency is doing that year for that school year when it comes to pre-employment transition services is definitely important. I don't know if you guys would like me to click on these. I'll just kind of briefly show you. I'm definitely not going to read all the way through it because it's a very extensive document. But if while you're trying to connect with an agency, if you have questions on how to connect, this is a really good inclusive document that talks about any questions that you might come up with. So what is IVRS? What is IDB? WIOA? We have a lot of the acronyms in here. I wanted to go down to, sorry if this makes anybody dizzy. Even if parents had questions on who is VR or why do we want to engage with them, you could always refer to this document. They have information about SSA benefits, information about tuition assistance. So this is a good reference guide if you're just curious what IVRS or, kind of what we talked about today could help with. This document may be very beneficial. It even talks about waiver providers and information like that. So I will go back to this one, and this one is specifically based on individuals who may have or may be experiencing low vision or blindness. So this talks about relationship for those individuals, which we've come up with as well, how to make referrals, links to the IDB counselors and what school districts they cover, how we coordinate our students. A lot of IDB staff and some of the pre-employment transition services and some of our youth programming that we have has typically been in-house. So we have like youth retreat weeks, we have different engagement things, maybe for a week long here at the department. But our transition has changed a little bit, and we are now doing more of an outreach model. So we have some youth service workers and staff who are making appearances in different districts throughout the state and providing more information and training on how to connect with IDB when you're a student and what type of services we provide. So I'm just curious with, individuals who are in the room here, would anybody like to share maybe how you have collaborated with a VR program, or how could you collaborate with the VR program, and or anything you guys would like, any information you would like to provide me? And if we don't, I can certainly move on. I know sometimes in different school districts, you might see contracted programs where the school district is paying half of the wage and IVRS is paying half of the wage, but then you have like a VR counselor in-house. I know Ames High does this with a lot of their students. I think there's also one in Des Moines Public, a contracted program where one of those individuals is housed on site, and it can be really helpful in getting students with disabilities connected to services that they're needing and pre-employment transition services. Local school plans. So the purpose of the local school plan is to outline the responsibilities of the LEA, AEA, IVRS, and IDB and any other partners involved in providing pre-eds and other transition services. So typically how this would go is each counselor for the district gets a school plan template. And so a lot of the information has already been placed in this template to be utilized by all the partners involved. So a lot of what this looks like is when it comes to those different 5 pre-employment transition services, they talk about what the school does. So does the school have a jobs class? Does, individuals on IEPs or 504s participate in said class? So it's just keeping all parties kind of responsible, making sure we're not duplicating services. And then also just having a plan to let everybody know, what is going on. I did see something in the chat. What was that question? I didn't read it.
Are the records available to the student family upon request? They could be helpful when trying to determine if students can perform essential job functions. Thank you.
If records from working with like a VR counselor, is that what you mean? What type of records were you looking for?
Are you wondering about the local school plan or specifically related to a student?
Yes.
Feel free to unmute too if that's helpful.
Records related to a student. Yes. Case notes, record of disability, what made them eligible for services can definitely be shared with an IEP team. You would just need to talk to your counselor and, a release of information signed from, the student or guardian. Records could be shared. I would hope that maybe that would be information that would be on their IEP and already, hopefully being discussed about that. But yes, records can be shared between VR agency and the student who's in a school district. They also have
Rebecca, I just wanted to jump in there and clarify that there has to be a signed release of information on file from if that student's reached age of majority. The student would sign it, but otherwise the parent would need to provide that signed consent to release the information.
Yes, and I shortened it and said ROI, but yes, release of information for that information to be shared.
While we're paused, Kelsey, I don't want to put you on the spot, but as Rebecca is talking about local school plans, I know that the evolution of those plans over the last several years have kind of gone from that sort of template. I don't want to be speaking for this, is just my opinion, but kind of a more generic sort of plan in place to, I think there's been a lot of efforts to make it a more truly a more useful, individualized plan for those districts and those partners. And I just wondered from your perspective, Kels, in because I feel like the local school plans can be an incredible tool that might be underutilized. So I just thought while we were on this slide, could I ask if you could share a little bit about that from your perspective, Kelsey?
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. So the local school plans are a fantastic tool that support collaboration at the local school level. And so really, the idea there is that we're empowering teams to have conversations about how services are delivered and how they're coordinating to support students in their local area. So it's not like it's these state agencies coming in and saying, you have to use this plan and you have to do it this way. Yes, there are a few things that are outlined in part of our memorandum of agreement between IDP, the Department for the Blind, and Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services that are non-negotiables. But outside of those few items, really the intent is for those local teams to be able to define a pattern of service delivery that really works for them works for their students and produces more positive outcomes. So if that's something that you haven't had an opportunity to be a part of yet, I would definitely recommend you reach out to the voc rehab counselor that's assigned to whatever building you're providing transition related services to, and ask, when is it scheduled? How can I be involved? I want to know like what this looks like for my school. And that could be a parent or a family member or even, a student wanting to learn more. It doesn't just have to be the service providers. So it really is open, and, we're hoping to continue to expand and bring in more team members as we move forward in the future to really build out strong, robust plans at the local level.
Thank you so much. And here is the resource page on helping with those plans as well. They've got training videos and a PowerPoint. And if you were curious to know, who covered kind of your area, they have the VR high school contact list as well. So while IVRS has a school plan in every district, the Department for the Blind really only participates in the school plans where they have clients in that district. So we may not always have a person from the Iowa Department for the Blind engaged at that district, but all it would take would be reaching out, submitting a referral, and getting us connected. So any other questions about local school plans? Hey, a journey through VR services. This is Tristan. Tristan was potentially eligible in February of 2020. Much like most potentially eligible students, he became eligible by his application, eligibility determination, and writing a plan for employment. He was participating in all 5 areas of the pre-employment transition services. He both did them as an individual with his counselor, and he also participated in a group setting. When the VR counselor collaborated with the school district, they were able to get parents involved. And what was next for Tristan is he ended up participating in Project Search and is now very happily working in hotels and, just living his best life. Sarah, who also went through VR services, she was referred in 2017, became eligible that same month. Typically, when we get people who are students who are potentially eligible, they turn into an eligible client as there's more services available once they become determined eligible and a plan for employment is written. There was collaboration with this school district, vocational rehabilitation services, IES BVI, there was parent involvement, community rehabilitation provider. So a CRP was brought into Sarah's collaboration as they had significant barriers to employment where some of that community, CRP assistance was needed. We also had an employer involved in the IEP meetings and many others. With these pre-employment transition services and vocational rehabilitation services, Sarah was able to become successfully employed, working the hours that worked for her, receiving the supports she needed, and it was a great success story. What can you do? Early intervention, we hear that with most everything kind of related to our industry and what we do for people is early intervention is key. Send a referral to vocational rehabilitation, IDB. There are counselors who cover all 99 counties in Iowa. So there is somebody always there that can get connected. A lot of information I provided when I worked in school districts seemed to be community resources. So we talked a lot about waiver, a lot about IHHS. We talked a lot about what type of options, individuals might have for housing after public education and going to live independently. helping with work-based learning experiences, you know, if there's different jobs they can do at the school, if there's different jobs they can do out in the community right around the school, getting individuals out, you know, that are on IEPs or 504 plans is really important to get them that hands-on experience. And also just providing a lot of post-secondary learning opportunities. It doesn't always take you know, like a degree. There could be certifications that would benefit the individual, different programs that they could engage in after public education to, you know, get that successful employment. Also with the support services and consultants, that's a lot, you know, individuals with some of the most significant disabilities who are utilizing a lot of support services in the school district, trying to just help them figure out what that looks like and how you can get that type of support outside as an adult. And so really a lot of collaboration with, you know, MCOs, providers, and things like that, just to have that nice, smooth transition. Have high expectations for students with disabilities. You know, like I know with the Department for the Blind, a lot of individuals who I have kind of talked with and are friends with, they talk a lot about other people's misconceptions are our biggest barrier at times. Even myself, when I was in the center and I was learning why cane travel, and you go to cross the street, you know, there's somebody inevitably that comes over and says, can you do this? Are you okay? You know, and it's like, well, I've learned school skills and tools to help me do this. So, you know, just having high expectations, you know, just letting them explore and be themselves and give them that opportunity. Encourage participation in classes, ensure students are completing tasks and assignments, engage students in identifying appropriate accommodations. I know there's a lot of engagement and talk about different assistive technologies that students can utilize who are in IEPs to access the learning environment and access information as their peers. And also just help provide opportunities for self-advocacy and choice. I'm a big fan of student-led IEPs. I love when the student gets to sit and talk and kind of own what they're doing and know why they're on an IEP. One of the first activities that I think is shared, you know, when a VR counselor starts engaging with a student is, do you know you're on an IEP? Do you know what's on that IEP? And so just starting some of those conversations. And so what is it that you need? All really good ways to connect with students and help with some of that transition into adulthood. So I know that was kind of a lot and a little fast. What questions do you guys have? If any.
I think one of the questions or one of the comments that came up in an earlier session was really just around is there, you know, there can be a wide array of services that go beyond the pre-ETs or what might be traditionally maybe offered within the school. So how do people learn, Rebecca, about what I know it's very individualized and what the job candidate or the student or young adult might need, but sometimes it's even just awareness of those people who are supporting that individual and understanding, hey, you know, maybe you need benefits planning and that might be a resource that's available, or financial planning support or certain skill development. Like how would people have a sense of that kind of wide array that might go beyond the pre-ET services that someone might need and be eligible and that VR might be able to provide?
Sure. The best way I would say to find out that information is to have a discussion with the VR counselor with that individual and talk about what's on their plan for employment, because disability related skills training can be many different things, you know, and so it just kind of depends on what type of training that student might be needing to get it added to a plan. A plan is an ever moving document when it comes to individuals with disabilities, especially students with disabilities, is, they may not need some of those services all the time once we meet that measurable skill gain, once we obtain that service. So I always don't like saying it because I don't like hearing it sometimes, but it really does just depend on what that person is needing. But if a teacher has a question and they know, or AEA or anybody has a question on how do we get this student access to this so that they can then progress, sometimes it just takes asking that question. Do you know a resource? Can you guys help connect this student to this service that's outside of our district's wheelhouse? So it just really, some of those conversations and, just saying, I think the student needs this, I can't provide it. Is there a way through their individualized plan for employment, we can talk about helping a student access what this is? So it really just takes those conversations at that individual level, because an individualized plan for employment, like I said, it can have many services on it. One of the main things is counseling and guidance. That's one of the main services that counselors are providing, whether it be a pre-ed student or a eligible adult. So when it's just a potentially eligible student and we haven't determined them eligible, that's when they're really just stuck to those 5 service areas. But once they're eligible, depending on what they need, whether, they may have a mobility barrier, they might need, specialized equipment to be able to operate a vehicle, then that's something that they can talk about with their counselor and get that on their plan. So it just kind of depends.
Could you talk a little bit more? I know transportation is a big challenge. Can you talk a little bit more about how potentially VR could support a youth or young adult with obtaining their license, modifying a vehicle? How can VR kind of help with individualizing supports for transportation for someone?
Sure. Well, one of the main things that both VR agencies would look for is comparable benefits. So if this student is needing specialized instruction to be able to participate in obtaining a driver's license, that would definitely be a discussion with, the school, VR counselor. There are different companies that both VR agencies, not so much Iowa Department for the Blind, because typically we don't have a driver's license when we're coming and accessing services. But with IVRS, how it had worked before when I helped a student access some of those services to learn to drive in a modified vehicle is, you're adding that to their plan because you've had a discussion about it. You say, due to this barrier, related to our disability, we're going to need either specialized instruction or we're going to need modified equipment to even engage in learning to drive while in secondary education. So it would take looking at the resources in the area, contacting, the contracted persons. I can't remember the agencies, but I'm sure IVRS on their website has some of those agencies that they contract with listed. You would, help support an evaluation. If the student has an MCO or some of that funding, it might be a coordination of they're paying for this portion, IVRS is paying for this portion, depending on kind of family income. So there's really a lot of moving pieces that would go into that. But if it's identified that that student is going to need that support, it just takes a conversation with the VR counselor, talking about the different resources that maybe, if the student's goal is to drive because that is going to get them to and from work, that's going to create more independence, then how do we get that added to the plan? How do we get that moving, and where does that funding come from? So we would look at all comparable benefits and all resources to come together to help support that student to get there. I know that they do have a facility in Des Moines, and typically, we're going to try to do less travel, like it just kind of depends on what's going to work for them and what level of maybe modifications they need. So it just kind of depends.
I don't want to take up all the questions. So if other folks have questions, please jump in. because I have another question, but I don't want to take.
You have good questions.
Okay, so here's my next one, and please, for others, you know, this is a good time, I think, to bring up some of those things that we're not sure about in how to navigate or options of things that could be accessed through VR services. But a question I have, and I know that this might not happen often, but what if you're working with someone that from the VR agency that is not as supportive of a need? What are recommendations that you might have for an educator or a parent or family or individual in trying to navigate, trying to get what they might need, or trying to understand if they're not able to get that, why? Because there is a lot of variation in the nature and personality of staff across the state. So in one area, you might see things are more accessible in programs and services, and other areas, you know, maybe it's not something that is supported very often. So any advice in helping people feel comfortable with knowing either when to challenge, if they can challenge, or how to go about that?
Yeah, a great question. And something that I know both agencies share. And, you know, we're all people. And at the end of the day, we all have our personalities. And when we're bringing a lot of professionals together to collaborate for a student, you know, there's not always going to be seamless service. You know, not everybody's always going to agree. So something that we always hand out and talk about, especially at intake at that first meeting, application level, is the CAP program. Being able to bring in a mediator to some of those conversations if things can't be resolved, I guess you could say, because I experience that a lot with being in so many different districts, and just some areas, especially in rural Iowa, not having the resources or, you know, the availability of some of the things maybe that student needed. You know, maybe the school couldn't transport a student to be able to get where they needed to go to do a work experience because they don't have staff. So I lean highly on advocates. I know there's a couple different advocate agencies that some parents will, you know, bring in an advocate to sit and help them with that language, because, you know, we all kind of talk in a very specific language, especially when we've been working with individuals with disabilities for a long time, and parents might be resistant to services because they just don't understand what that means. So having somebody there, I think it was Hope Haven was one of the advocates I had seen come into an IEP meeting to kind of help with some of that collaboration, because there's just so many people involved and they're all talking about student supports and things like that. So I would just suggest, you know, relying on, if you're feeling like a decision isn't being made for the best interest of the student, you know, pulling in some of those state supports to help advocate for them and what they need. I guess that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Other questions that folks? Bill, please jump in.
Sorry, here I am. I guess Amy had mentioned benefits planning, and that's really become a passion of mine, because more and more we hear about folks that don't understand it, don't know that it's available, and also that there's huge family concerns that come up about, or the person's concerned for that matter, about losing benefits if they enter into competitive integrated employment. So it's kind of linked, and I don't know if it's so much of a question as maybe a comment, or maybe get your thoughts on that or how that's working out. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Benefits is something that we add to any individual's plan who is receiving Social Security income. And so benefits planning training it can be like learning a new language at times for some VR counselors. So I will say, there's some VR counselors who have a lot of knowledge with benefits planning, and we're all going to provide that basic level of what is SGA, what is the difference between SSI, SSDI, how you report wages. We'll do that basic benefits planning. And I know IVRS had Susie Paulson, but I think I heard maybe she has retired, which was an excellent benefits planner. But somebody else to actually connect to starting to do benefits planning information as well is IWD, and their Ticket to Work program can offer some of that basic benefits counseling. And WIPA has always been IDB's biggest support, which we used to refer people just when they were looking for employment. So even before you're looking, or you're getting all the good information from the individuals who know a lot about benefits planning. But sometimes, well, not sometimes, now an individual can only be referred to WIPA, who will like bring up their case file and go through everything once they have a job. So while we all wish we could be trained on everything Social Security, as a VR counselor, we get, I like to say we get just enough information to be, it gets scary. Because it always changes as well. So I will just say that we have handouts, we have information from Social Security Administration to bring that basic knowledge, but there should probably always be a referral to either WIPA or an agency that's going to help, like Ticket to Work, to help support them after they're employed, to make sure that they're knowledgeable about, not losing benefits, what that looks like, what continues even though they are working. So all individuals who sign up for VR services are getting that basic benefits planning, and at least a discussion or further referral for that. That was a good question, Bill.
I'm going to follow up just a little bit, and because you had mentioned, training the VR counselors, which I think is awesome and it's needed. We had an excellent VR counselor. She was amazing, but didn't even understand what benefits planning was, or that there were other avenues to pursue if things were looking like we were going to start losing benefits, because there's so many other programs they can access. So it's good. And fortunately, our agency had a benefits planner. So she came in and we had a discussion about it. We were actually talking about an ABLE account, and she thought, well, he'll go over his amount, but it was great because she's wonderful. And she appreciated the conversation. So I'm glad to hear that there's training going on, just even basic. And I'll plug Disability Rights Iowa too. I see they're on here. They also have an excellent benefits planner who in Misty Johnson, who I think is probably the best one I've ever come across. She's just amazing. So folks, remember that it's not just VR that has benefits planners. They're all over.
They are. And IVRS has like a committee of counselors who are more knowledgeable and receive more training in benefits planning. And that can help other counselors that maybe don't have a lot of the training, or maybe aren't super familiar, that they can lean on their committee and their team who is learning more about benefits planning to get the right information. So definitely trying and training and getting all that. But like I said, even Susie Paulson would always say, like, it's a whole nother language. It's a whole, it's a whole program that it would have to be your full-time job just to know all of that information sometimes, but there's resources available, and yes, more training going on.
I noticed in the chat, I want to thank all the folks who put some comments in. Maggie shared that Angela Young is the benefits person at VR at this time. Jenny shared WIPA and the link for more information on the WIPA program that's through Disability Rights Iowa. Amazing. I know you had mentioned that, Rebecca, as well. Just amazing resources. And the fact that, VR does what they can to try to get information to counselors. But I so appreciate what you shared, Rebecca, which is the fact that it is a constant moving target. And so needing that expertise and staying on top of things. And And for those who aren't as familiar with benefits planning, it really is a critical thing. When you're doing vocational planning prior to employment, people are really afraid of impact and not always aware of all the options that can exist in trying to support. But making that informed choice by having good, solid information is really important, I think. One of the questions I had for you, Rebecca, was also around, just the idea that the VR agencies can also help with looking potentially at the establishment of self-employment or establishment of a business or micro enterprise, that those are things that are not always on people's radar. We might just think of really traditional jobs in the community. So is that something that you could share a little bit about as we're looking at youth and young adults and we're thinking about the entire array of options of how employment can look? Can you talk a little bit about the potential of self-employment?
Absolutely. IVRS has a wonderful self-employment program that also is available to students in transition, because I know we have a lot of entrepreneur students out there. We have a lot, I think a lot of some of the transition planning and transition events that IVRS collaborates with and does statewide encourage a lot of that entrepreneurship. And so they qualify just like adults do. There's no age limit to self-employment, and that gets a team of self-employment experts on the student side. And they, then if that is their goal, if they have a business, they've set that goal, that's on their individualized plan for employment, then the counselor helps them kind of walk through those steps. They'll have to learn a lot about how to run a business, if they're needing further education to be able to manage said business. So it would just really, just like any person wanting to start their own business, they would receive the same services as a student in transition. As far as I know, I should add that with IVRS, I haven't been there for just a couple years. But we did that when I was there, is students can do self-employment as well.
Great, thank you. Cindy.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk about the difference between special education transition under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and maybe what you're talking about more on the VR side, just because I think it can be intimidating to someone who maybe doesn't know special education, but yet they're helping advocate for competitive employment in the schools.
Sure. Well, individuals, who are on IEPs, and they're receiving VR services, it's because a parent, a guardian, a teacher, somebody has identified that they want to be employed. They want to work. So that essentially is why any VR counselor would be engaging at that, public education level for students that are on IEPs. So I don't know if you could clarify a little bit more, because no VR counselors are not in like the public education just serving students. It's only because it's been identified that student would like to engage in competitive integrative employment or self-employment or be employed after high school. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. I just wanted to make the point that there's also transition laws under the Special Education Act that's required for IEP teams.
Yeah.
But someone advocating may not understand that side of the law, but maybe they understand more the VR side and what we're talking about here. So I just wanted to see how familiar your staff would be to know when to push on what side or to know when to go get an advocate for special education if needed.
Gotcha. I wouldn't say we receive specialized training on that information, but maybe something that, our leadership discusses. And I know that we've done a lot of kind of cross training and integrating, information for all sides so that we're familiar. But no, I don't, not that I've heard that they get specialized training for that. It's just that we've been told they want to engage in employment and we're there to kind of help, because a lot of the information that they're doing at the school that's in Achieve is really going to help translate what kind of support and information they're going to need as an adult on, waiver services and things like that. So I would hope the VR counselor is really reading and learning the information in Achieve, because they do have access to that information. Once a student's been identified, once they've signed a potentially eligible agreement, IVRS, IDB can access that Achieve system and read through that information. Does that help any as well?
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
You're welcome. Okay.
I'm gonna jump in and make a comment connected to what Cindy's talking about. I would say that my experience is that your VR counselors are not always really aware of IDEA requirements, or I would say, even as a rule, like as the Department of Education is moving towards implementing their differentiated accountability structure under IDEA, I would guess most VR counselors aren't aware of that, or I think we still see a lot of very, sort of siloed systems in some ways of, I know my VR stuff, or I know my DE stuff, or my education stuff. And I think our AEA folks and the folks in education have been learning a lot about all those secondary transition resources and how to do that. So I think they're wonderful resources, but I don't picture a lot of VR counselors maybe helping support that advocacy. I'm not even sure that a lot of VR counselors know what resources are available for youth and families when it deals with education and questions about access to resources, advocacy planning. And that's where Ask Resource Center, which presented recently for us, is a good resource. Obviously, Disability Rights Iowa, I think, can be a fabulous resource, but I do think there's a lot of room for that to improve. I don't know if that would be your take, Cindy, as well. Oh, thanks, Mari. She put ask information in there. Other questions or comments? Oh, thank you, Beth. Your local AEA special education folks are more than happy to answer questions. Yeah, they're going to be some fabulous resources and some fabulous advocates, honestly, I think, at really promoting competitive integrated employment for all students. So,
and I think that we're still going to see more cross training moving forward, because WIOA was put into effect not too long ago. if we kind of think about it, and I think when I started with the agency, they were just getting into schools, and so it's definitely been a learning curve. And like, I know teachers and districts and schools have been learning a lot about why we're there, and then yes, I think the reciprocation of learning, all of the information is definitely something that's in the continuum.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say as well that I don't know how many folks are aware of this, but VR held a public meeting this morning about changing eligibility or changing qualification requirements for their counselors. And so I just want to point out that as we're talking about how things have been done, the knowledge, skills, expertise that folks have when they're in these roles, that may look different as VR is changing Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services, I should say, I'm sorry, not Iowa Department for the Blind. But if they are changing their criteria for hiring rehabilitation counselors, and you might be getting individuals who have less experience, less formal education. You may have folks who have great experience as well. So I don't assume that it won't be good experience, but it is something that I really hope that all of the stakeholders pay attention to, because it could have an effect that makes a difference on what people understand, what they know, even how things have been done. So the importance of attending to that as those requirements change, and making sure that the job candidates and the potential eligible candidates are really getting their needs met, I think will be really important for all of us as advocates. All right. I'm just going to go ahead, as I know folks are probably going to need to jump off pretty soon. I just wanted to thank Rebecca so much. I really greatly appreciate your time, all the great information. Our next community of practice is November 14th. The Institute on Guardianship and Conservatorship has developed some resource videos that are really focused for lay folks that are tied to some changes in Iowa's legislation in the last session around guardianship and conservatorship and requirements around that. So trying to make it easier for folks, hopefully, you know, maybe lessening the need to hire attorneys for those kinds of supports and navigating that process. So they're Professor Gittler with the University of Iowa and the director of the Institute on Guardianship and Conservatorship will be presenting on some of those resources that were developed and wanting to share those out. And then our December session is December 12th. And then that's going to have more of a focus on youth around age of majority and guardianship and conservatorship. And hopefully we're going to see less folks that fall under guardianship and conservatorship and utilize less restrictive ways to support them and supported decision making and in other ways. So that will be our December session. If you aren't on the Iowa Coalition mailing list and would like to be, please just reach out and let me know. You can put your information in the chat. Our next IC meeting is November 21st. It will be in person in Ankeny at the public library. It's 10 to 3. We'll be sending some information out on that. I know it's a conflict with the NAMI conference. Thank you, Roxanne, for letting me know that. And I am really sorry that there will be that conflict. But thank you everybody so much for joining us today. Thanks again, Rebecca, for all your time. We greatly appreciate it, and have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.